From the top of Mehrangarh Fort, perched 400 feet above the Rajasthan desert, the city of Jodhpur looks as though it has been drenched in paint. There is no gradient, no explosion of color, none of the chaotic variety that usually defines Indian cities when viewed from above. Instead, there is a dense expanse of blue stretching for more than 6 miles, swallowing streets, rooftops, walls, exterior staircases, and the interior walls of open courtyards. Cubic houses fitted tightly together climb toward the fortress walls like a motionless sea crystallized in the sand. The image is so distinctive, so far removed from what we expect a desert city to look like, that it is almost impossible to see it without wondering why. And that is precisely where the problem begins. Because the explanation accepted by almost everyone, including many tour guides and travel books, is either incomplete or simply wrong. The most popular explanation is also the most convenient. According to it, the houses were painted blue to reflect the desert heat. Intuitively, it makes sense. In a region where summer temperatures easily exceed 113 degrees Fahrenheit, anything that helps keep a facade cooler seems like a practical decision. And there is some truth to it. Light colors do reflect more solar radiation than dark ones, and a pale blue wall reflects a significant portion of visible light. But when we examine Rajasthan as a whole, the argument begins to fall apart. Bikaner, Jaisalmer, Ajmer, Pushkar, and Jaipur itself face the same climate, the same desert, and the same brutal summers. Yet none of them was painted blue. Jaisalmer is golden, Jaipur is pink, and Udaipur is white. If blue were the obvious thermal solution for the Indian desert, we would see it spread throughout the region. Instead, it is concentrated almost exclusively in a single point on the map. A second explanation, repeated just as often as the first, is religious. Blue was supposedly chosen because it is the color associated with Shiva, one of Hinduism's central deities. According to the myth of Samudra Manthan, Shiva drank a poison called Hala Hala to save the world, and the poison turned his throat blue. His devotees, the story goes, began painting their homes that color as an act of devotion. Here, too, there is a kernel of truth. Shiva is indeed revered as Nilkanth, the blue-throated one, and Jodhpur has a strong Shaivite tradition. But if that were the primary reason, the same practice would appear in other cities across northern India, where devotion to Shiva is equally intense. Varanasi, considered the country's holiest city of Shiva, does not have blue houses. Neither do Kedarnath, Rishikesh, Ujjain, or Somnath. The religious explanation became attached to Jodhpur's blue, but it did not create it. A third theory appears when the others fail to convince. Some argue that the color emerged from an aesthetic decision made by a Maharaja, a kind of royal decree that standardized the facades to please the ruler looking down from the fortress. That version is appealing because it simplifies everything. One man, one order, and an entire city obeying. But no consistent historical document records any such command. No known decree issued by the Rathore Maharajas required the facades of the old city to be painted blue. The idea that it all began at the will of a ruler is a later invention, useful to the tourism industry, but fragile as a historical reconstruction. A fourth, more recent version attributes the blue to tourism itself, as though the city had been painted for photographs. That may be the most mistaken explanation of all because it reverses the timeline. When the first European travelers arrived in Rajasthan in the late 19th century, the blue expanse was already there, long before any tourism industry existed. To understand where the color truly came from, we have to travel back well before cameras, guidebooks, and tour buses, to the year 1459. That year, the Rathore leader Rao Jodha decided to abandon Mandore, his former capital, and establish a new city in a more defensible location. The chosen site was a sandstone hill rising like a wedge from the Thar Desert, naturally protected by steep escarpments. On that hill, Rao Jodha began building Mehrangarh Fort, with walls that would eventually reach 118 feet in height and 66 feet in thickness at certain points, dominating an area of nearly 2 square miles. At the foot of the fortress, a new city began to take shape, compressed between the castle walls and the emptiness of the desert. It was within the narrow streets of this old city, inside the perimeter of the original wall that still defines the historic center today, that the story of the Blue began. Urban life in Jodhpur followed, as it did throughout most of India at the time, the logic of the caste system. The neighborhood closest to the fortress, occupying the highest and most protected ground, was populated primarily by Brahmin families, the priestly and scholarly caste. They conducted rituals, taught, drafted documents, and advised the nobility. And it was this part of the population, concentrated along a few specific streets in the ancient heart of the city, that began applying a peculiar mixture to their facades. The base of the traditional plaster was lime, applied as a whitewash over the walls, a common practice throughout Rajasthan. But in Jodhpur, copper sulfate was added to the lime, creating, under certain conditions of humidity and alkalinity, a characteristic blue shade ranging from pale blue to soft indigo. It was not an arbitrary choice. It was, first and foremost, a matter of chemistry. And this is where we reach the part that tourism brochures tend to soften. Termites are a silent threat in the Thar Desert. The wood used in beams, doors, frames, and furniture is subjected to constant erosion by insect colonies moving through walls made from earth and lime. Traditional Indian buildings, constructed from mud brick, wood, and plaster, are particularly vulnerable to this kind of attack. And copper sulfate, which Europeans would only begin using extensively as an agricultural fungicide in the 19th century, was already known in Rajasthan as an effective pest repellent. When added in small amounts to the lime mixture, it produced two effects at once. It protected the wood and plaster from insects, and it gave the walls a color that no one had necessarily chosen for its appearance, but that emerged as an unavoidable consequence of the material's chemistry. Jodhpur's first blue facades, then, were not painted for the sake of being blue. They were painted to last. The blue was a byproduct. There is, however, a second layer of physics involved, and it helps explain why the practice endured. A white wall reflects more visible light than a blue one, but Jodhpur's climate cannot be reduced to visible light alone. The Thar sun delivers intense radiation across a broad spectrum, and wall surfaces absorb heat throughout the day before transferring it into the houses at night. Blue, particularly the pale shades used in the region, reflects a significant portion of near-infrared radiation, helping the walls remain cooler than they would if painted in warm shades such as ochre or left as exposed brick. It is not a magical solution, and it cannot replace thermal insulation, but it produces a noticeable difference in indoor comfort, especially in buildings without mechanical ventilation. Add to that the psychological effect. In a city where the horizon is almost always brown and yellow, entering a blue street creates an immediate sensation of coolness. It is the same reason hospitals are often painted in cool colors, and why our eyes associate blue with water, shade, and rest. One final ingredient is needed to complete the picture: the social dimension. And this is where the story takes its most interesting turn. For decades, perhaps centuries, blue paint remained a marker of status. Preparing a lime mixture with copper sulfate cost more than applying pure lime and required access to a specific mineral as well as specialized knowledge. Only the Brahmins had both the means and the willingness to pay for it. As a result, travelers looking down over the city could identify the Brahmin Quarter simply because it was blue. The color became a kind of address. There was no need to ask who lived on a particular street. You only had to look at the facade. But like almost every visible social marker, the blue eventually began to be copied. As families from other castes became more prosperous, they began painting their houses the same shade. At first, this may have been seen as an act of transgression. Then it became a habit, and after that, it became the landscape. What began as a symbol of distinction transformed, ironically, into something democratic. Beyond a certain point, no one had to be a Brahmin to paint their house blue, and no one could be identified as a Brahmin solely because of it. The color lost its original function as a caste marker and acquired a new one. It became the identity of the city as a whole. Jodhpur no longer had a blue neighborhood. It had become a blue city. This is one of those rare cases in which an exclusionary symbol was appropriated so thoroughly that it lost its exclusionary meaning. It is also a case in which practical chemistry and social culture overlap without either explanation canceling the other. Copper sulfate protected against termites. The lime protected against heat. The blue color, produced by both, protected the reputation of those who could afford it. All of this worked at the same time, sustaining a tradition that no one ever needed to justify in writing. If we move the timeline forward to the present day, the picture becomes complicated in a different way. Modern Jodhpur has more than 1 million residents, and its historic core, that maze of narrow streets beneath Mehrangarh's shadow, represents only a small fraction of the larger urban area. Modern neighborhoods have expanded around the historic center, and the blue is largely absent from them. Concrete buildings, 2- and 3-story houses, industrial paints in pastel shades, and neutral colors dominate the outskirts. Today, the blue city is an island within a city that is no longer blue. And within that island, the tradition faces pressures Rao Jodha could never have anticipated. Modern acrylic paints are cheaper than the traditional mixture of lime and copper sulfate, offer greater durability against rain, and come in a much broader palette. When renovating their homes, many residents choose contemporary solutions and abandon the blue. Others preserve it precisely because they have realized that the color has become an economic asset. Tourism changed the equation. Beginning in the 1990s, when Jodhpur started appearing more frequently in travel magazines and documentaries, the blue ceased to be merely an inheritance and became a brand. Boutique hotels, guest houses, rooftop restaurants overlooking the fortress, and cafes established inside former Brahmin homes all depend directly on the blue landscape to attract visitors. Local authorities and heritage associations began encouraging residents to preserve the traditional color on facades throughout the old city, in some cases offering technical support for restoration. At the same time, there is an obvious tension. Preserving the blue has become a choice, balanced between historical authenticity and economic convenience. Some facades, particularly those facing the most popular photography spots, are periodically repainted with modern paints in shades of blue far more saturated than the original color produced by copper sulfate. To tourists, the effect is spectacular. To those who study heritage, it is a reminder that every tradition changes in nature once it becomes a product. There is an even quieter question behind this story, and it concerns what this transformation means for the residents themselves. For many families who have lived in the historic center for generations, blue is neither an aesthetic decision nor a marketing strategy. It is simply the color of home, the color that has always been there, that their grandparents applied with their own brushes that marked the corner where they played as children. When those residents see a neighbor repainting a facade beige or white during a renovation, what they feel is not merely nostalgia. It is the tangible realization that part of the landscape defining their collective identity is disappearing, one house at a time. And yet, for residents who feel that their homes no longer belong to them but have become scenery for other people's photographs, repainting in another color can be a small act of reclamation, a way of saying that the wall belongs to them before it belongs to the postcard. Both attitudes coexist, often on the same street. From the top of Mirangar, these tensions are invisible. Viewed from a distance, the city remains the blue sea that astonishes every visitor who climbs to the fortress overlooked for the first time. But when examined carefully, the expanse is no longer uniform. Peeling plaster reveals mud brick underneath. Beige walls interrupt the sequence. Vertical concrete additions rise above old houses and alter the silhouette of the whole. The landscape that appears immutable is locked in a permanent struggle among the past, the present, and the market. And it is remarkable to think that this struggle ultimately grew from the simple act of mixing two materials in a bucket, lime and copper sulfate. One fought termites, the other protected the wall, and together, without anyone planning it, they defined the signature of an entire city. Perhaps that is the most interesting lesson Jodhpur has to offer. Cities are not painted so they will be remembered. They are painted for practical, ordinary reasons, solving everyday problems with whatever materials are available. And when those problems are solved consistently over generations, the technical solutions accumulate until they become identity. Jodhpur's blue is simultaneously the result of a chemical reaction, a social hierarchy, an extreme climate, religious devotion, and a contemporary tourism industry. None of the popular explanations is entirely wrong, but no single one explains everything. It is their overlap, layer upon layer, that has made the blue what it is today. Less a color than an urban memory painted across the walls. If you enjoy stories like this, where architecture, geography, and culture intertwine to explain the world we live in, consider following the channel. Other cities are waiting with similar secrets to be told, and each one holds an answer hidden beneath the surface, much like the one Jodhpur offers. What appears to be decoration is almost always engineering disguised as tradition.